Hello, my name is Hamlet Dobbins, and this is Memphis Material, an oral history project chronicling the stories of the visual arts in Memphis, Tennessee. Memphis Material is a podcast celebrating the personal histories, the intimate stories, and the studio practices of some of the people who help shape the creative landscape of our city. The unedited interviews are all recorded at the Memphis Listening Lab, an archival gem located in the majestic Crosstown Concourse in beautiful Midtown Memphis. The website for Memphis Material was designed by the wonderful Brian Dixon. Now, we don't really have sponsors for this show, but if we pretended that we did, this episode would be sponsored by the people at The Hub. That's the automotive mechanic shop where I go and get my oil changed. That will become important a little bit later in the episode. Now, today's interview was the second of two interviews that I did with Paul Behnke. This interview was recorded on December 13th, 2024. Enjoy the interview. All right, cool. All right, today's Friday the 13th.
Right.
December 13th, 2024. Here with Paul Behnke. Okay, so let's pick up where we left off.
Can't remember where.
I know. Well, I tried to cleverly make us end on when you got to Memphis and when you got to Memphis College of Art.
MCA, yeah.
But we did not quite hold to that, but we were in that range. And so, if I remember right, you came from... It was you and Robin decided to come back to Memphis so that you could go to school.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And that was a shift from where you were living before, which was in Arkansas, near family.
Well, we were there, and then we had moved to Dallas, Texas to live near Robin's sister.
That's right.
And then I applied. We got married while we were living there. And then I had applied to school at MCA. And I didn't hear anything back, so I was really kind of dejected. I thought, I didn't get accepted or whatever. And so I was like, well, it's probably about right.
What happened? They forgot to message you, or it got lost in the mail?
I think so, because Robin kept saying, call them. Why don't you call them and find out, rather than just speculating and thinking the worst. So I did. And of course I got a scholarship and all of that. So somehow it had just gotten lost. And so we really quickly made plans to come to Memphis.
No, what did you end up doing? You moved here, you got an apartment. I mean, you could be living in the dorm because you had a partner.
Right. The MCA, sent out this little booklet with the admissions packet and all that. And they had a lot of suggestions, and like where you could rent apartments, laundromats, things like that. And one was this place over on Stonewall. And so it was like one of those 4-unit shotgun kind of apartments with the screened-in little porches. And so we got a place there, sight unseen, and we... thank you. And we moved there, and when we first got there, I started unloading the U-Haul, and Robin was looking around, looking around the apartment and everything, and she's like opening up the drawers, and like the drawers are eaten away. There's like, rat poop in the drawers, kind of run down. The neighborhood seemed a little scary from moving from Plano, Texas, which is this sterile concrete, environment. And so she was like, "Oh, I don't think I want to live here. I don't think I want to live here." So I had gotten the U-Haul almost completely unloaded, and she tells me this, and so I just started loading it back up. We had already put down deposit and all that stuff, but it was so cheap back then, it wasn't that much money.
Right.
But while I was reloading the U-Haul, this woman who lived upstairs came home, And she started talking to Robin. She was probably in her 30s and about our age. And she was saying, "Oh, no, come upstairs, look at my place. Look what you can do with it," all that. So she took Robin upstairs and they looked at her place. And then Robin comes back down and says, "Okay, I think we can live here." So we ended up staying there for a while. And then we moved over on North Armandale.
No, what was Robin's plan being here? What was she going to do?
She, back then, we would just move to a city and where we wanted to live, and she would get a job temping. And almost without fail, they would say, "No, we want to hire you," at the end of her temp contract. And so that's what her kind of plan was. She worked for an architectural firm as an admin assistant for a while downtown. I think Nedak Bobo or something was an architectural place downtown then. And then a little bit later on, she got a job at International Paper. That was she started out as an admin, but then she kept getting promoted. And
okay, now just to back us up a little bit. So what time, what's the year? Where are we?
This was 90, I started, my first semester was January 95, was when I started school.
Okay, yeah. So I was in town then, but it was right before I went to Iowa. And so, what are some things that you remember in terms of the city? Like, you've come here. What are some things that you remember in terms of what was going on?
Well, I, of course, I had grown up here, so I was kind of familiar with it already. But Robin had never lived here, and she and I both just really loved, especially coming from Texas, not only the diversity, but the just the little hole-in-the-wall bars and restaurants and really cool kind of places, even like Old Zinnies, Lamplighter, P&H, of course, was a big deal.
Now, were you guys also going to see music, or was it mostly just kind of hanging out?
We did go to see a little bit of music. I remember seeing an Elvis impersonator and his son, who was also a little Elvis impersonator, at I can't remember the name of the place. It was some like little steak place in Midtown. Supposedly Elvis would eat there before. And I remember I thought it was so funny because they would bring out these little crusted French bread, garlic bread things in a basket for you as a little pre-dinner. And then I saw them when they would take it off the table, they would go and just throw it back in a bin and then like scoop it out. And but that was fun. And, we went to Wild Bill's frequently. We would go. My brother was just starting to play around town at the time. He was playing at the Edge Coffee Shop, in that Cooper Young area. Let's see. I'm trying to think of. We would go down to Beale Street sometimes, and we saw Clarence Gatemouth Brown at B.B. King's, because you could dance there.
And if I remember right, music has always been something that's sort of important with you and your studio practice.
Yeah, it's something that kind of gets me in a mindset. Kind of when I'm thinking about my paintings or kind of thinking about what the mood I want for my paintings or whatever, it kind of gets me in that mindset and seems to kind of seep out,
And so you're here, and you guys make that move, and you're going to start at MCA,
right?
And so this was in '95,
right?
And so were you also going out and seeing art in the city, or was that more something that kind of came later?
No, I always wanted, since we lived in Dallas and in North Carolina, we talked a little bit about going out to the art centers and things and seeing work. In Dallas, there was a lot of galleries we would go to see and the museums around there. And when we got here, let's see, we would go. I believe David Lusk still had gallery space. We would go to some shows there. There was another gallery that was a woman's name who owned it that I can't remember the name of it. Fred Burton showed there sometimes.
Was it Lisa Kurtz?
Yes. Yeah. And I remember going to shows there. Also, I quickly became aware of Plan B gallery space in Cooper Young. And so we started going to see some of the artists' shows that artists were putting on. And then later on, not too long after that, I got a studio space over there. And I almost never painted at school in the studio space provided at school. I had a studio space at Plan B, and Fred would come over there to look at my work, and then I would bring stuff back to school for critiques and things, for group critiques and things. But
now, just to back up just a little bit, thinking about MCA, what was the atmosphere there like in terms of sort of mid-90s?
It was still seemed small to me, and kind of more of a close, close-knit community. It was kind of a smallish student. I think there was like 200-something students there. They still were offering a lot of really cool things that weren't offered anywhere around here, like book arts, paper making, the surface and fibers arts, surface design, fiber arts, all of that kind of stuff that made MCA such a unique little jewel in Overton Park was still thriving there at that time. Maritza Davila was my printmaking teacher. Fred Burton was predominantly my kind of mentor, and he taught almost all of the painting classes that I took, and life drawing I took from him. Of course, Remy Miller, Bob Reisling was over there, Tom Lee.
Well, let's just take them one by one. So you started with Maritza. So
Right.
I did an interview with Maritza sort of in the early days of this project, and Maritza has been super sweet and super kind to teach at U of M and be sort of like Yang Ben's not helper,
Kind of advisor.
the
kind of.
alternative to Yang Ben, because Maritza is such a different kind of teacher.
Right.
Talk a little bit about Maritza.
Well, I didn't really respond. I was just taking probably printmaking as one of my requirements. I didn't really respond to printmaking that much. I thought the process, it was just too laborious, too intricate. I wanted something quick and fast and, intuitive, and that you could change and, whatever really quickly. And Maritza was alternately kind and scary to me, a little bit of both.
It's funny. Full transparency, a lot of our students are just like, oh my God, she's so hardcore,
Yeah.
And I go and I watch Maritza teach, and it really is like when I was in grad school, I took Japanese, and there was a teacher, Kuria Sensei, and she was about Maritza's height and super short cropped hair, and my name for that class was Nervous Laughter, Don't Look at Kuria Sensei. And it was just like because if you looked at her, then she would call on you, and then if you got it wrong, she would then make fun of you in front of everybody else. And it was just this like brutal kind of, you need to learn this or else, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And when I watched Maritza teach, and again, I've never had her as a teacher, but when I watched her teach, it really was this kind of no nonsense, like the students would show up without their stuff, and she'd say, well, what are you going to do?
Right.
It wasn't like, oh, well, that's okay, come back
Right.
next time and you'll have your stuff. She was just like, well, where is it? And then she'd be like, go get it.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like she wasn't being mean.
She was just intense,
hardcore.
and
She was just like, she just didn't want to take any mess.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. And I came to appreciate her for that. I really did love, once we got to like the monoprints and that kind of stuff, I really enjoyed that. I liked the screen printing a lot. That's where I first had I did my best work in that class was screen printing. And I started using some imagery that Fred had helped me develop to begin to do abstract paintings. So I was starting to feel a little comfortable with that imagery that I was working with. So it kind of came together for me with that process, the screen printing process.
Now, just to back up a little bit, to give the listeners or the people listening an idea, how would you describe the images or the things that you were kind of thinking about or making at the time?
Well, at first I was only doing figurative work. I was doing figurative work the best I could. I mean, I wasn't really, I didn't really have a lot of chops as far as any kind of realistic kind of work. So I just kind of would do these drawings and keep a lot of drawings in sketchbooks. And I would carry them with me everywhere and draw still lifes, or if we were talking, I would be drawing you. And then I would go back and try to make paintings based on those drawings. So, and I was just kind of feeling my way along because I had never really tried to paint realistically before. So I was looking at people like Gwen John, a lot of I loved those British Michael Andrews, those kind of, I guess they call them kitchen sink, British School of London figurative painters that had these kind of muted colors, those muted greens and grays and browns and stuff like that. And I was really into them. And also just doing like I said, still lifes, things like that. I always wanted to work on abstract paintings. I was always kind of fascinated by abstraction, but I was always so intimidated looking at a blank canvas, and I'd never painted an abstract painting before I came to MCA, and I just didn't know how to begin. I'm like, how am I gonna ever do this, approach it? So I tried a little bit here and there and kind of had these failed attempts. And Fred got can't remember if we talked about this last time or not, but Fred got my sketchbook with my pen and ink drawings and the cross-hatching and all that in there. And we went to the library and he put them on the copier and started blowing them up. And he would give me the images and say, now these are just compositions of grids with the cross-hatching and black and white, all that. And he said, if you want to start making abstraction, start using some of these things as compositions, pick a few forms, one or two forms, and stick with black and white, and just try to make as many paintings, as many compositions within those restrictions, just two forms, the grid, blacks and whites, as you can, and see what happens.
I like that as an entry point.
Right.
Did that, I mean, obviously that resonated with you.
Yes.
Now, is that, like for me, when something like that happens, it becomes almost like a thing that I can go to as a surefire method of getting things going, you know? Mm-hmm. So like, right. For me, that way of beginning is really important. And right. Sometimes, you know, when you get lost or when you find yourself in a weird path, then you can always kind of go back to this particular thing. Mm-hmm. And that's proven to be the same for you.
Yeah, I was so at home within those limitations, those restrictions. Mm-hmm. And it just never seemed to, I could probably go back to that now and still find a well of compositions and paintings to make based on that. I really thrived setting up those kinds of parameters for myself and discovering how much freedom you can have within those bounds within those bounds.
And for me, I know you've been teaching this last semester, and I know when I started teaching, and still to this day when I teach, a lot of times I'll think about a teacher who was good, and then I'll try and figure out, sort of break it down nuts and bolts. Like, okay, what was it that so-and-so did?
Mm-hmm.
What was it that made me really come alive in that class? What were the things? And for me, I never had Fred Burton. P.S. I totally need to get Fred Burton in here because I feel like he's sort of like a person who gets talked about and mentioned a lot for people as a, like you were saying, sort of like a turning point guy.
Yeah.
What do you think? Like, looking at him through the lens of your teaching and thinking about like nuts and bolts, what do you think? What were some things that he was doing that were really powerful?
The thing I really responded to him was just his idea, what I perceived anyway, his ideas about art and being an artist. He was the first person I met that lived their life as an artist, that everything was geared towards being able to produce work and to go to residencies and things like that. And he was the first real life person I'd ever met who art was the most important thing, and everything else was geared to support that. He always had, he still has an extremely prolific studio practice. He's working every day, and that was inspiring. His knowledge, he's like an encyclopedia of art and painters. And I remember the first painting class I had, painting one, he would go around to each individual student and say, okay, what kind of work do you like? What kind of work do you respond to? And so I said, I like the German Expressionists, and I like, some British painters and things like that. And he would come back the next class with a list, individual list for everyone of 100 painters to look at. And he said, look at the, because we had in that painting one class, they were just basic assignments: do a self-portrait, do a cityscape, do a landscape, still life, whatever. But he said, look at how these people did these things and approached these subjects. And that was just to be able to, this is pre-Google. It took some work to come up with that for every student in the class, And he also just has a very, I've heard it called cult-like, but because there are certain students that do gravitate towards him, and I was one of them. And there was that same kind of no-nonsense, look, you're here, you say you want to do this, so get on with it. That works for some students and it doesn't work for others. I really responded to that. I joke, I think I've probably told you before, the best compliment I ever got from him in a critique was looking at one painting. He said, that part in the bottom right-hand corner is starting to work. And that was the most praise I ever got from him in a critique or a class.
He's also, like you were talking about this sort of like cult-like following. He is, if I remember right, a really tall guy with this really booming voice.
Yeah, he's like 6'7" or something like that. Yeah,
and he has this sort of like giantness to him.
And he's been everywhere. He's traveled so much. He's done so many residencies. He so it was for some, and the way he looks at painting is, I remember one thing that stuck with me, that still sticks with me all of these years later, is we were in a critique, and I forgot what preceded it, but we were in the critique, and I must have made some sort of comment, and he said, Paul, do you only want to be a painter, or do you want to be a poet who paints? And I just thought, I want to be a poet who paints, obviously, no brainer. And that just kind of stuck with me, that kind of attitude about painting and what being an artist was. He would give us these quotes, these they were kind of these poignant, like I forgot, one was, I think it may have been Lawrence Durrell, whose definition of art, he said, art's purpose is to teach us that we are dying without having properly lived. Things like that. He loved these Irish painters, Patrick Graham, just an incredibly dense, poetic, just serious as fuck painter. And he is the one that introduced me to the British abstract painters from the 60s and 70s that I still, look at a lot today. I think for certain students that have that same sort of bent and tendency to look at life in a more romantic way, Fred really captured those students' imaginations, and he captured mine, just because kind of larger than life person, like you're talking about. And then that combined with his work ethic and the knowledge he had in general about art and artists was just inspiring.
And then you also mentioned Remy was there.
Remy, yes.
What classes did you have with Remy?
I think only with Remy I had a drawing 2 class, I think. That's really the only class I remember having with him. I'd never had any. I think I only had a foundations class with him. Remy was great, really nice man, a good teacher. I never really responded that much to his work personally. So that might have been something that kind of, I wouldn't say put me off of him, of course, but, but was the reason I wasn't more involved with his teaching or asking him to be an advisor or anything like that. The same with Bob Reisling. Bob, the only thing I remember Bob telling me that I still think about and would tell students is, I can't teach you how to be an artist, but I can teach you what artists do. And that was something that stuck with me. I remember I had a watercolor class with him, and I hate watercolor. I just couldn't, just seemed so namby-pamby and just ineffectual. I mean, I don't know. I like thick paint and, heavy-handedness and all of that. So you have to be so delicate with watercolor and kind of plan a little bit too as you're doing it.
Right.
And I didn't like any of that. And I remember I just could not get a good painting. And he's like, hey, I thought you were supposed to be some kind of hotshot around here. You can't even make a decent watercolor. But
now, who else was there in the program? I mean, you were talking about the sort of the smallness of it. Were there other people? And then I remember when I was an undergrad in grad school. I mean, the teachers were great, but it was really the people around me that I was really learning from. Who was there in your cohort?
Well, Lisa Williamson was there. She started out in graphic design, but really quickly moved over into fine arts and was a painting major. So I had classes with her. I also had art history classes with her. Dale McNeil, this guy named Wayne Bishop that's still here in town, Joey Slaughter.
Now, just out of curiosity,
Corey Hogue.
I mean, you mentioned Lisa, and any other people that come to mind. Talk a little bit about were there people that you were particularly close with? Where, and then also thinking about the lessons or the, maybe not lessons, maybe just sort of the what you gleaned from these other people in the program. I'm curious about that as well.
Well, with Lisa, I just remember her being such a serious student, and I think she was doing mostly figurative work then, but her work was just so good, and she was so serious. She was just such a hard worker, so I always thought, no matter what she's doing, she's gonna do well, because she just worked and worked and worked and lived at the studios. From people like Dale McNeil, Dale was probably my best friend through art school. With him, it was more, I was had a friend in him who was interested in contemporary art. And that's something I think MCA lacked back then. There wasn't a big push on what's going on now in New York or LA or Berlin or London or wherever, the art world was then. I can't even remember really, except for maybe when Fred would give us artists to look at, like maybe Squeak Carnwath or Amy Silman back then. Those were probably the most, and contemporary, but I don't remember getting that a lot from there. It wasn't until Sue-Ann Wong came and was a visiting artist, and I took a Painting 3 class from her, and that was a really great class. She was a really good teacher. She was young. She was younger than me at the time. She was always talking about contemporary artists that were young and living in New York and working right that second. And she was always showing us examples of, like Fred would show examples of, maybe the most contemporary, and they were contemporary artists back then. They were living and working then, but like Ida Applebrug and people like that, which, I was never really, but it's not somebody that is like, this is the hot thing. And when you're in school, when you're a kid, or just starting out, I think you want to know what's going on. At least I did. I had never even been to New York at that point. I didn't go to New York until I went, Dale got accepted into the New York studio program up there. And so I went to visit him for a few days during that semester. And so that was the first time I'd ever been to New York and could see what was going on up there,
No, so Dale was a part of that program that, if I remember right, MCA had sort of a reciprocity agreement with,
right,
where you could go for a semester or a year and be in New York and take classes, and then that stuff would transfer to the MCA. And then was that something that you had thought about doing as well?
Well, I did get accepted to it, but I had made plans to stay with a friend of a friend who had like an extra room for the semester, and I was going to pay them a little bit of rent. And then that fell through, and I was just a little bit too, not like, because I would have probably been staying at like a YMCA somewhere there. And, New York, even in the early mid-90s, even though it was a little bit better than the 80s, was not like it is now. Sure. Like, it's not like Disneyland now in Times Square and all that. So I was a little bit, I think, scared, a little bit apprehensive about just going up there and like staying in a YMCA or something.
Yeah, I mean, the uncertainty of it would be, I think, kind of scary for anybody.
And so I turned it down. I didn't end up going.
Now, what were some things, a person's first trip to New York, going up there and being there and seeing things with Dale, what were some things that you remember about that trip?
Well, the Sensation show was there. at the time at the Brooklyn Museum. And so, if you want to talk about plunging into the contemporary art world of what was going on and hot at that time.
I mean, that's such a huge, infamous show. And then, but also a particularly infamous part of that show's history was being there at the Brooklyn Museum of Art with that whole Giuliani hubbub thing.
Right, yeah.
But now, what were some things that you remember from the show? I didn't get to see the show.
Well, the Damien Hirst, I remember he had the shark there, and I remember I just loved the title of that piece and how it related to the image of the piece.
What was it again?
The title of the shark in Formaldehyde is the physical impossibility of death in the mind of someone living. And to me, that was just such a perfect metaphor for that phrase, because death is like this shark that's circling in the back of your mind, and it's always there, and it's gonna get you one day, and we try to keep it at bay. And so I just loved that title. That's probably still why I'm a little soft on Damien Hirst right now today. I don't love a lot of his work, and I think a lot of it is just kind of connish. But I admire anytime I see an artist having power and fleecing dumb rich people. I think good for them, Like when he had his auction auction at Sotheby's or someplace, and it was like the night before the market crashed in 2008. And so he made all this money, and then the next day everything crashes and he was out of there like a bandit. And I just thought, that's amazing.
Well, it's really funny to me. I mean, I think the people, I think the first Damien Hirst piece I saw was maybe one of the pharmaceutical pieces,
right.
Or maybe one of the laboratory pieces where you just sort of go in and it's basically a very sterile environment with medicine and tools under glass, sort of in those vitrines that he made. And I remember thinking that those were really interesting, and they definitely made me slow down and look and pay attention. I mean. And then, of course, like you were saying, some of the other stuff that he does is sort of like, here, I made it, and now you buy it, and now you have a Damien Hirst, and I totally get that too. But to me, one of the things that was really interesting about seeing images from that show was that it was a way to see a lot of really weird stuff together, because really I only experienced the show through the book.
Right.
And so you were talking about the Damien Hirst. Were there other pieces in there that kind of stuck with you?
Well, the Chrysophilia, of course, just because mostly of the controversy that was surrounding him at the time, because, when you see them, you're like, oh, this is coming from a different... The reason he's using this material, this elephant dung, is because it has roots in this culture, and he's not using it in a disrespectful way or anything of that nature. I mean, Giuliani at the time would have you think that he was just taking piles of shit and throwing it at images of the Virgin Mary and a big fuck you to religion and religious people and all that. And that, of course, wasn't the case at all. Let's see. I believe...
P.S. Just a parenthetical aside, Chrysophilia makes really great watercolors, Paul.
Does he really? Yeah. I don't know that I've ever seen any, but maybe I should look.
Now, have you seen the 5 obstructions?
No, but Lisa recently has just been telling me I need to watch that.
I have the DVD, but I totally thought about it when you were like, watercolors, because basically what Lars von Trier, a horrible human being, does is he sits down with Jürgen Leth and has him remake this video.
Right.
And then he gives him all these parameters. And at some point he's kind of like, yeah, I mean, that would be really hard, right? And then he would be like, yeah. And then he would say, well, what else would be really hard? And then he said something, and then he was like, okay, that's a thing. And then suddenly Jürgen Leth realizes this is the setup. And so anyway, that as you were talking about the watercolors, I was like, yeah, I need to tell Paul that he needs to commission Paul for some watercolors.
Right. Yeah, I remember, I guess Damien Hirst made an impression on me, because I think it was in that show too, that he had inside that sealed off, how he has the sealed cases, big huge cases, and it was like a rotting cow's head, And so the maggots and the flies are being born there, and then the flies fly up and get zapped by this bug zapper, and then the whole thing just starts over again, this whole cycle. And that made an impression on me. I was trying to think of some of the painters there. There's one painter, I cannot think of his name. His surfaces are super, super slick, shiny, reflective paints. Sometimes he had a whole series of like doorways, like with a circular portal in them.
Gary Hume?
Gary Hume, yes. I remember seeing him. Fiona Ray, I think, was in that show, and I really love her work. It was great to see that. It was just in general, it was so great to see all of this work by these artists that you would see in the magazines, and I would never have gotten a chance to see, in real life until I went there.
So you went up there, and the sensation show obviously sticks in your head. Were there other things? Were you able to go to the Met or MoMA or any of those other places that are just kind of like revelatory for a lot of people?
I went to all those. I went to the Met. I went to the MoMA. One of my favorite museums is MoMA. That's like the church.
Do you remember anything from that trip?
I don't remember any specific show from that was going on right then. I just remember the permanent collection, seeing like Demoiselles d'Avignon, Starry Night, the Barnett Newman, the huge red zip painting that they have there. Just the usual stuff. I mean, I was just like trying to just like take everything in, because all of those things too, I'd seen, of course, in books over and over and over again, and on coffee mugs and all this stuff. But until you see them in real life, you have no idea, really.
I remember seeing that Rauschenberg bed.
Yeah.
It was there, and I remember going, oh, that's really small.
Yeah.
Like for some reason in my brain, I thought that it was going to be this massive thing. But I think it's like a twin-sized bed. It's not even a twin-sized bed. It's like a cot.
I think it's a cot.
It's
yeah,
really
it's
tiny.
like a single.
Yeah. That was one of the things I remember. And then also sort of talking to the teachers when I got back about, how horrible it was to look at every image, as large as a slide projector could project it.
Right.
I remember going to see that. So now, what did that mean for you when you came back?
Well, I don't know if it meant anything specifically other than it just, it's like I was saying, when you see a work in person and you're able to get close to it and see how the paint was applied and see what order it was applied in some cases, and you can judge the scale of your body to the work. I think it helped even more push me into, oh, this is how you do it. This is what you do. And I really, like I said, I really felt like I remember reading a quote from George Harrison saying that playing the guitar came really hard for him. Like Paul McCartney, everything came very easily. He could just pick up an instrument and start to play, and it sounded amazing. But George Harrison said he had to work and work and work and do scales and do scales and do scales, and it finally started to make sense to him. And I feel kind of like I was that way with painting and with art in general. Like I knew I wanted to do it. It was something that I loved and I wanted to do, but I always felt like I was a little bit behind as far as technical facility, as far as knowing how to do something, that there was something that other people knew how to do that I hadn't caught on to yet. Just things like, things would be difficult for me, and I would obsess over them, like setting up a palette. Like how do you set up a palette? How do you know how to set up a palette? Things like that. And of course, there were MCA had no practical things like that. No technical, no practical, because I think most of those people that were teaching there came up probably in the 70s when minimalism was the thing. And so they didn't really know how to do a lot more than they were doing too. I mean, there was a small foundry at MCA, right? Nobody used it. Nobody knew how to work it until a grad student came there from another place for a semester, and he knew how to get it up and going. So they did. But, I mean, God bless Tom Lee. He was just more of a freewheeling kind of, he wasn't technical or, into any of that stuff.
Yeah. I mean, now, it's funny. I'm trying to stay all chronological, but when you were talking about standing in front of a painting and looking at how it was made, in my brain, I saw a painting floating above your head. And what was it? What were you thinking about?
I was thinking, when I was talking about that, about something like Starry Night or, and also like Demoiselles and some of those other Picassos, because there's a couple, I think, in MoMA in that same, or I think now it's in that same room with Demoiselles, that were some Picasso self-portrait-ish kind of little small paintings, either a head and shoulders or maybe a torso. And they're kind of unfinished. And so being able to see something like that half finished too was a kind of a good, was instructional, because like I said last time, that guy, Paul Edwards, he was the first person I had ever been able to, in Memphis, was the first person I'd ever been able to watch from beginning to end, like from stretching his canvases, building the stretchers, doing the drawings, putting the drawing on the canvas, and then how he built the painting up. And so when you get a chance to get a little bit of an insight into these old masters and things, and see it in the flesh, it's one thing to see it in a book, to see just like the black underpainting, line drawing underpainting on a Picasso or whatever, or a Matisse where it's scrubbed out and redrawn over and things like that. But when you're in person looking at it, it takes on a rawness and a real life quality that you can kind of transfer into your own studio. It's not something that is, okay, this is an image of that thing that we see 2x2 in a glossy Art in America or something. It's something that you can still see the smudges of, and sometimes fingerprints and things like that. And it's easier to relate that to what, as a student, what you're doing in the studio. That's why it always just drives me nuts when students don't care about art history or don't care to go and look at art, really. They have this myopic little blinders on about what they're interested in. And with most of them, that's not much. It's only a little bit. And when you say, you see threads and posts and stuff like this all the time of people going back and arguing whether art history is important for artists to know, And I don't know why is that even an argument? I don't understand. I mean, to me, it's like if you love something enough to devote your life to it, wouldn't you be interested in what other people and how other people that devoted their lives to it, how they approached things and what they thought about it and all of that,
Yeah, selfishly, as I listen to you talk about that, I think to myself, okay, so all right, so how do I fix that? Or how can we as teachers remedy that? And I think part of it in my brain is that, of course, some of us grew up with objects in their homes, right, but a lot of our students don't,
right,
and a lot of them will come at it. You and I were just talking about this, the great crime of how every art piece is the size of a projected image in art history. Well, it's even worse. It's on this tiny little screen.
Right.
And so I wonder if the first day of class or the second day of class really should just be going to an artist studio, yeah, and seeing the physicality of this space and seeing the physicality of what's going on and what's possible. maybe that's what we'll do, or that's what I'll do next semester.
I think that, I mean, I would have loved that when I was in school. I would have loved to go to somebody's studio and see how an artist really works, and what environment they worked in. I think it's just different for, and I don't know that you can really plan for it. I think a lot with almost every student, it's probably different. Like, what will be the hook that will get them in? And sometimes you say things that you think you don't even remember saying it, but they latched onto it, and it meant something to them. And I remember, like, Betty Callow, who was along with Fred, one of my favorite teachers at MCA. She was the art history teacher and the slide curator at MCA in the library. And she would always try to show the students the youngest photo or image available of the artist, to try to help them connect just even subliminally with this artist that we're learning about. Because, you see Monet, and he's like this old fat guy with a long white beard and no hair, and he's like, and students can't. I mean, they think 30 is ancient. So to look at a Monet, they're just like, that guy.
Right.
But she would show like portraits that his or a self-portrait he'd done when he was young, or portraits people had done of him in class that took classes with him when he was young. And he looks like this Johnny Depp guy. He's got this like long black hair swept back and this striped modish looking coat. And it's a lot easier I think for young people to identify with these artists. And also, I just loved, and I think a lot of art history, the way it's set up and taught, it's still image, date, name, period, and that's it. Okay, now we're on the Baroque. Here's the Baroque name, and you just memorize all of those things. But at MCA, we had I took a Picasso class from Betty, which was a 2-semester class, and divided up his career into those 2 semesters. So we looked at everything and we read everything. I took a Faust class from her. So we listened to operas on Faust. We read Christopher Marlowe. We all of this stuff. We got in-depth looks at these things too. So that was interesting to me because there was more time to talk about, say, Picasso living in the Bateau Lavoir doing opium and never cleaning his studio, and just these kind of things that young people are interested in. I mean, we wished they weren't, because it's not good, because if you mention that Picasso did opium, maybe they'll go out and spend the rest of their lives in an opium den. I don't know what's going to happen to them. But, I mean, they're getting that from rock stars and rappers and all of that stuff anyway, and that's what they're interested in. So why can't you talk about what these artists were like and what they were going through? Because that's what makes them accessible and relatable to students, to young people. And also, by the way, some of them were almost genius, and thinking about this stuff too.
Now, when you were talking about, what was the teacher's name again? Betty
Callow.
Betty Callow. Okay. And what was your first introduction to her? Was it just through like a survey class?
I think it was because I'd already had a survey at U of M, had a couple of like the world art things. I think the first class with her was a Baroque class, and that was something I was totally not interested in.
Right.
I mean, I was, like I said, even though I wasn't making those paintings yet, I was looking at a lot of abstraction, the New York School and stuff like that. And so to think about these religious paintings, realistic religious paintings, I just wasn't that interested in. But once I took the class and learned about why these artists were doing what they were doing, the coded messages and things that they put in the work, it brought it alive to me, and I really, when I got out of that class, I was like, oh man, that was amazing.
So it was, in terms of thinking about what she was doing well, it was putting everything that you guys were looking at into a kind of context, like an historical context, but also, in the same way that when we look at a piece and we know where it came from and we know what the person is saying, or we can have some sort of insight to it, then it gives us an appreciation on a second or third or fourth level.
Right.
Again, sort of selfishly, what were some other things that she did that made it feel really good? Like we were talking before about Fred Burton and his physical presence and how all of that worked. How were the classes structured, or how did she approach teaching in that way?
Well, we did look at, of course, it was slide-based. We looked at a lot of slides. But one of the things that she always said was, I don't care if you know the exact date of this painting. I don't care if you know the exact name of the painting. I want you to know the major artists of this period. I want you to know the major dates of this period. And I want you to know what those artists' main concerns were, the reason we are grouping them all together like this. And that took a little bit of the pressure off, for one thing. And then also, it's stuff that I still remember today. I mean, I don't remember what date, the Death of the Virgin by Caravaggio or whatever was painted. But I know what the concerns were at that time, what he was thinking about when he was dealing with it, and the basic timeline, how it fits into that Western progression of art history, And she was also just, she was interested in the subject. So at least to me, she made it interesting. I know there were a lot of people that thought her classes were boring. But she was also one of those teachers that expected you to do the work and to show up. And, she wasn't giving anybody any slack either. And I guess that's the common thing about the teachers that I really responded to was I liked, not only did I probably need that, but I also liked that they took it seriously, that this is something that art is something you take seriously. And if you are in a math class or a science class or an English class or whatever, you're not coming without your book, without your paper, without your notebook, and just showing up and thinking, okay, I'm going to go to class today. But it happens in art classes all the time. And it's like, why aren't you taking this seriously? This is, it's fun, it's creative, it's all of those things. But also, it's serious, right?
Now, do you think a lot of that you had in terms of like coming at it with a seriousness, do you feel like a lot of that was because you were away and then came back?
I think, I think probably with my general personality, it would have kind of always been that way. But I think it did help that I came back to school later. Because like I was saying, at U of M, when I first got out of high school, I was more concerned with, my girlfriend at the time than I was about any of my classes. And whatever hair mousse I could make my mullet look good. I don't know. But being older, yeah, definitely, I felt, and I was married and everything was more settled down. And I was just like feeling, I was ready to say, okay, I had come to the point, okay, this and that decision of this is how I want to spend the rest of my life. And so that, I think, that's why I went back to school, was because I knew I wanted to do that, and I knew my work wasn't as good as people I'd been showing with. And so I didn't, it's not that I loved school. I didn't really like school. But I knew it was a means to an end. It was something that I needed to accelerate my development and to get me to a place I wanted to be quicker.
Now, were there, I know a big part of, I think, the reason you responded to the art history classes is that, you have this love, drive to think about history. And were there other art historians that were there, or was it mostly Betty Callow?
I think it was pretty much mostly her. I think there were a couple of other, but I don't think I ever took any classes from another. I think there might have been one or two other people. Probably Lisa would be better to ask about that. But because I seem to vaguely remember that there were other people teaching it there occasionally, but I didn't take any classes from them.
Now, were there other studio people that were there, and in terms of teachers that were really important with you?
I think only Fred and Sue-Ann. Like, I think if it's kind of, I think, but I'm going to be honest, I think if it weren't for Fred, Sue-Ann, and Betty, I think it would have been a wash. It would have been a wash. For either the reason that I just don't think the other artists that were teaching there were very good or motivated, or either that or my personality just didn't mesh with theirs and them, the way they taught.
But now, just out of curiosity, I mean, and the reason I'm asking this is that I noticed with my education at the U of M, it was very rare for me to have a class with more than one class with someone. I mean, even though we had sort of a cohort and we would see them in the studio, it was very rare for me to have more than one class with a person.
With fellow students.
Fellow students. But at MCA, I know that was totally different. And I'm curious how that impacted or affected your experience there.
Well, I think, it does make for a more close-knit kind of experience, I think, because you kind of feel like you're going through this together. Like I was in the same classes with Dale and Wayne and Lisa in painting as I was in drawing, life drawing, art history classes. There was always people that either were in your program, that were in your major, in those other classes with you, that you'd be going and having a critique with later, in another class. So that's the best thing I think about a small liberal arts college.
Now, what about the studio experience? Because I mean, you were saying that your studio was at Plan B for a lot of your time there.
Right.
But I'm curious. I mean, when I was talking about how it was kind of rare for me to have more than one class with someone, it wasn't rare for me to be in the ceramics room with with a person many times, many years. And so I'm curious about you having the studio away. How do you feel like that impacted your time there?
Well, I remember, because we did a lot of painting, working on the work during classes, and
because at that time they had on Wednesday it's painting, and on Thursday it's blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. And so I just found it really hard to paint in front of people and to focus and to sit down and focus, and get into it and not be self-conscious with other people, other students around. They had the painting classrooms over here, and then how MCA is set up in that little square kind of. So then over here they had all of the studio space, which was one big open space with these dividers. And I know other people, like Lisa again, for example, and Corey Hogue and a couple of other the painters that were up there. They did all kind of hang out in the studio part of it, in their studios, and it was all, like I said, it was all kind of open. So there was a lot of talk and things, and sometimes I would be over there, but most of the time, really not. I had those few friends, Dale and a couple of other people that I was close to, and they would come to my studio to look at stuff. But then also, I think maybe because I was so much, because I was probably 10 years older than, and 10 years now doesn't seem like that much, but from 19 to 30 or, whatever is a big difference.
Yeah.
Plus I was married.
Yeah. That's a massive thing.
So I had friends artists that were friends of mine from growing up here. So they were kind of my peer group. A few people that, like I said, that I went to MCA with. But for the most part, I wasn't involved with the rest of the students. I never went out to 616 with them. I never, went to raves. I never did any of that stuff, those kind of bonding things that younger students do a lot, because, you're right. A lot of that stuff happens among themselves, among your peers. Mm-hmm. And I had just a different set of peers, and most of them were my age, and not in school,
Now I'm curious about Plan B. I mean, my experience with it was totally through the exhibitions that were there. I never had a studio there. I'm super curious. Who ran it? Who was in charge?
Brian Bishop.
Okay.
Another guy, I can't think of his name, Mark something.
Beagle.
Mark Beagle, yes.
I'm doing so good.
Yeah. You're better than that.
It's the espresso.
And who else? Mostly those two guys. Mm-hmm. And I remember Mark Collins had a studio there. This guy, Paul Edwards, me. I shared a space with a friend of mine that was an artist that I knew from high school named David Phillips.
Now, David was a student at U of M,
yes,
as well. And funny little offshoot story while you drink some water. So me and my then wife, Julie, were living in the Kimbrough, and I was standing there talking on the telephone, and I was just kind of looking out the window, and I see this pot that I made when I was an undergrad in the windowsill of my next door neighbor. And so, I knocked on the door, and sure enough, it was Dave Phillips.
Yeah.
And so, anyway, all right. So now that you've had your water, were the other people there working as well? Was Brian and the rest of the crew, were they there? Was it kind of what was the atmosphere or the community like there?
It was fun. I mean, because everybody was there working. Arlene Jernigan was there. Diane Hoffman had a studio there for a while. So, we were all working there. We would all have cookouts there. There was always shows going on that Mark and Brian were putting on. Mm-hmm. So that was fun. So that was mostly my peer group through school and stuff.
Now, when you were talking about those people being there, I mean, there's a ton of great people that are in there. Mm-hmm. Now, was that when Brian was working on those really massive 6x6 encaustics?
Encaustic works.
And then that was before he went off to Cranbrook, or?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
I can't remember, because I remember he was at MCA, and then he graduated, and then he went to Cranbrook, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Or
was it Joey that went to Cranbrook?
I think Brian went there too.
Okay.
Or I mean, there's such a connection between MCA and Cranbrook.
Right.
So I don't know who all really was there. But I can't remember if it was before or after, if he was doing that before or after Cranbrook. But we also, my wife and I and David and Rhonda Wilson, who I worked with at the Art Center, we started a little zine called Shad Run about the Memphis art scene, and we did some reviews and got people to put some drawings and stuff like that in there.
No, I don't know anything about this.
Yeah.
Do you have some? I want to see them.
I think in Robin's stuff packed away still.
Okay.
I have some issues of it. We only did maybe 5 or 6 issues of it. But
it was regular zine format, so
it was
8.5 by 11.
A little smaller, like half of that. So it was like a little, booklet, and so that was fun.
And then was there, like, I remember when I had my studio at martial arts, there was a lot of, like, it would just kind of go and sit in Pinckney's studio, and Pinckney would paint. I would kind of hang out and sit around. Like, was it that kind of thing, or was it more, well, we're here to work?
Well, I did that a lot with that guy, Paul Edwards, that I was talking about, that, he had graduated from Yale, was a Vietnam vet, was a little crazy, and I would go and sit in there with him and talk about painting and watch him work. And in the winter, because it was freezing, he lived there as well. And there was no amenities there at all. There was like running water, but downstairs to get to the bathroom. I don't know if you ever went down there or remember, but it was like a maze, like a labyrinth going down there. And you would have to, you could put your hands on the sides of the cinder block walls and they would be sweating to kind of guide yourself through there. And then finally you could see like a little glowing light from the bathroom, and you would go, and there's the bathroom, But it was no amenities there at all. But he lived there, and in the winter it was freezing there. And I remember he worked on these huge 6 foot by 6 foot canvases, and I remember in the winter he would make like a little hut out of them, and had a little love seat in there, and he would sit and do drawings that he would make into the paintings, like in the summer when it got warmer, spring. And so I would sit in there with him and talk to him while he was making the drawings. And of course he smoked like a chimney. And so being, isolated in this little cube of paintings, in that smoke, I might as well have smoked as well. That was kind of the life there.
Now, what were some other things? If I remember right, at that time, there was also Jay Atkin was down there, kind of just down the street. And then, yes. But this was after, this would have been after MCCA closed.
Yes.
Now, are there any other artists or spaces that you were kind of thinking about in terms of that time in your life?
I remember a guy, I really liked his work, and I kind of liked the idea of him as an artist, was named James Starks. I don't even know where he is now or what he's doing, but I met him. He was one of those guys that I was telling you last time that my mom would cut out articles of when I was in high school, and to give me an example of somebody in town who was doing art, making art, being a real artist. And so I met him first when I was working at the Dixon, and he was the preparator there, and got to know him. And he was somebody that kind of was, at least as the idea of being an artist was kind of influential to me. That's about it. I was kind of, it's going to surprise you, I was kind of an opinionated asshole and judgmental, slightly judgmental. I know it's a stretch. It's like, what, Paul? But it was true. And so I didn't really, there wasn't a lot in Memphis that I just liked, or a lot of artwork that I liked.
No, just to back up a little bit, you mentioned the Dixon, and then you also mentioned Art Center. So you were working at the Art Center. No, just normal stuff? Who else was there? I think you're the first person I've talked to who worked there.
Rhonda Wilson, this guy named Greg Howler. I don't know what happened to him.
Greg passed away. He passed away, and he... some people at the Art Center were super cool and put together a show at Martial Arts of the work that was there, and some other pieces. Boy, he made really interesting, strange paintings.
He was an interesting conceptualist artist. He always kind of made me feel bad because, like, he was so smart, and he was a nice guy, and he was the manager there when I was working there, And occasionally I would give him a ride home because he didn't have a car. And every night I gave him a ride home, we would stop and he would get one of those big bottles of Sky vodka. And he would drink it overnight. And the next night when I gave him a ride home, we'd get another one. And, he was just like, drowning in that stuff. And I felt bad for him for that,
And thinking about that, I mean, for me, one of the things that's really interesting about the Art Center is that it's such a cornerstone, because really, aside from Sherry's and the spot that Tim Crowder owned way out east, those were really the only art places in the 90s. And so you were there with Greg and Rhonda. And then was Tom owned it at the time? Yeah. And then Susan was also there?
Susan was there. Ray, this guy named Ray, was like I don't know what his exact title was, because Tom was the main guy. But then Ray was kind of also the main guy. Maybe his was like the day-to-day operations and everything. And Susan and this guy named Jody Hill worked in the warehouse there. He was like this long-haired musician guy, really laid back, super cool guy. I just remember he listened to Howard Stern all the time. He always had Howard Stern playing in the warehouse.
No, I wonder, was he the same guy that also worked at Cheapskates?
I don't know. I don't know about that.
Because there was a long-haired dude at Cheapskates, and he had all of these Howard Stern shows on cassette. And he would just listen to him in his Walkman all the time.
I don't know. Maybe, I mean, this guy Jody introduced me to Wesley Willis, and people like that. He would listen to a lot of Japanese punk bands and stuff. It wouldn't surprise me if he was into skateboarding and stuff like that.
And then so you were there at the Art Center. How long did you work there?
I worked there I worked there at least probably a year. I wasn't the greatest about showing up when I was supposed to. There was room for improvement in that area, I remember. So I think we kind of eventually parted ways amicably.
And then what was going on at the Dixon? What were you doing there?
It was really strange. I was kind of like the head of security there. There was one guy that was, I forgot maybe this one guy, maybe that was his basic title, but I pretty much I reported to him, but I managed the guards and all of that kind of stuff. I was also like a liaison when they would do private things at night and parties and things. I would have to be there for security and to, make sure the guards were doing what they were supposed to do, meet with the caterers, let them in to do all their stuff, stop drunk guests from going upstairs into the office area, stuff like that. I remember the funniest and scariest thing was, they used to have that little kiosk out in the front where you would drive in and get your tickets, and then you would come around. And this one young woman was working out there one night at a party, and she hit the alarm button. And so the SWAT team, a helicopter, everything came out. And I had to walk down the driveway with my hands up and try to explain quickly to these police that it was an accident, that it was a false alarm, that she hit it by accident. And they took that very, very seriously.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so you're here, you're at MCA, and then you finish. What happens after you finish with school?
Well, almost after school, I did, almost before after school, I went to Italy on the traveling fellowship. Then I came back and finished. And then almost immediately, Robin and I moved to New York.
No, okay, let's back up. Okay, so you went to Italy. What was that?
That was the traveling fellowship that you could, you submitted a proposal, like what you would do there, why you wanted, or it didn't have to be Italy. It could be anywhere, that you wanted to travel to. And so mine was Italy. The proposal was Italy, and my proposal centered around Bernini's sculptures and what I wanted to see in different places, different towns in Italy. And so yeah, I won that, and I was awarded that, and we got to do that for a month.
So what was it about Bernini in particular?
I just I don't know, Ecstasy of Saint Teresa, and that kind of religion, romance, myth, all of that, and plus technically they just always just fascinated me.
I mean, for me, I'm always interested, like when you were talking about going over and studying the Berninis, I'm always curious when someone has a particular task and they set about it and it's centered around another person. I mean, I'm always curious when that kind of thing happens, what is it about that person or that person's work that motivates them to do such a Herculean thing, like to write a thing and go to Italy and do that kind of thing. Now, once you got there, what were some things that you found out or paid attention to maybe that weren't a part of the initial drive?
The biggest thing that I discovered was kind of like what we were talking about, that you see there was a lot of that kind of work, the Renaissance and Baroque and stuff, that I wasn't particularly that interested in. And because you see it so much and you see the imagery so much, and like I said, you see it on coffee mugs and t-shirts and all of this stuff, and it kind of starts to degrade it a little bit. And then when I went there and you see David in person and you see the Pieta in person, and you see the Caravaggios or the Last Supper, or you just think, there's a reason that these things are on every coffee mug or on every postcard or on every, and you kind of forget that when you haven't seen them in person. And like I said, it was just that kind of awareness of myself physically in relation to this physical object. And I think that is so important in experiencing art. That's one of the reasons why one of my main, I have a love-hate relationship with social media, but that's one of my hate relationships, is because you're only seeing it on this small little screen. And then it becomes like that's all the only way people either want to see it or do ever see it. And you can kind of judge a work or from that, seeing it on a screen, but you can't even really say this, because we tend to either uplift or dismiss things very quickly, especially on a scrolling kind of thing. And so, but you can't say, oh, that's a bad painting, or that's a good painting, or that's a this or that. You just can't.
Yeah.
You can say, I suspect it might be a bad, but you can't because you haven't seen it.
Well, I'm curious, give me an example. Like you mentioned a host of really great ones, but talk to me about any one of those, because I think like when a person says, I saw the Caravaggios, and it was awesome.
Right.
Every person who's seen the Caravaggio will be like, well, yeah, it was because of this. And then someone will be like, I never even thought about that. And it was really because of this. Like, what was it, not necessarily about the Caravaggios, but any of those that really clicked with you?
I loved the Michelangelo's slaves. They were in that same area as the David. But just the roughness of those, and the from being carved in stone, they had this. They seemed to have this kind of primordial mutability, that they were almost in motion still and evolving, and there was a real. It fascinated me that you could take something as inert as stone and give someone that sense of, this is what I'm trying to show, and that it's communicated, so directly. And I think almost anybody, whether they were sensitive to art or not, or could give you that same could have that same feeling looking at those statues. And of course the Pieta or the David, they're amazing, and they're so because of the finish and the technique, and of course the Pieta, he was like 25 when he did that or something, and it's just just incredible. But you see, the real humanity to me was in those slaves, was in those kind of emerging slaves.
Well, I mean, like for me, I remember when I went to see David. I've seen David several times, but I remember the most recent time that I saw David, it was almost like a social experience. Like I think before it was more like, oh, okay, I'm in this room, I'm looking at this thing. But the last time I saw it, it really was seeing the other people around it and seeing how they responded to it. And for me, the thing that was really strange was that as I entered, I was really struck by the alienness of David and how it wasn't right, and how there was something that was foreign or incorrect or something. And then as I was there, like my internal metronome began to shift, and suddenly David was right and all of the human beings around me were wrong. Like there was something wrong about them, and it was like this thing where being in the presence of such a large thing in such a frozen form, and when you look at it and you're walking around and you're sort of seeing it, you pay attention to the parts of it. And then suddenly it became the thing, and then everything else became incorrect or foreign. And then leaving there, I mean, I remember leaving there, it took me like an hour to have everything else be normal, And it was that way with that, like there's this big teal Lycia Scavenge painting that's at MoMA, and it's massive, and it's just teal, and then there's like one little flower in it, and I think it's like one of those big booty women ones, and I just remember being like, that is so fucked up, that's not right. And then the same thing happened, and I remember just like it took me forever as I looked around the rest of the paintings to get over that teal and that sort of mesmerizing, and then that fog like form that's in it. I mean, to me, that thing with, and then also seeing the Caravaggios, for me, it was sort of a similar thing. It was really a social spectacle. It was like, I know that these people literally have a Caravaggio bingo card, and they are going around the city or around the country, and they're sort of clicking it off, and to me, I'm not totally sure that I got past that with Caravaggio. But for me, the Berninis were always really interesting too, not just like in the virtuosity of it, but also, like you were saying, in kind of this physicality of it. And for me, as someone who's never carved or who has carved, but it was just soap, just understanding how that can happen. And then also the Berninis are just such a, for me again, they become this kind of like historical thing where that those sculptures have survived wars and civil wars and chaos of all kinds, like the one that's there in the Pamphili, is that right? The one where Persephone is changing into a tree.
Yeah.
It's just like, what the fuck, like when you see that, it's just, there's a stillness that happens in there. And for a long time you weren't allowed to take pictures in there, and then right before I left Rome, you were allowed to take pictures, and it was a horrible experience, just because everyone was just clicking away. But I'm curious, in terms of thinking about your time there, what were some other aspects that you feel like you carry around with you?
Well, first I want to say I love the way you put that about the David and the crowd. I think that's an incredibly a sensitive way to think of that and to have experienced it. I think that's amazing. I, as far as I don't know. I some of it I remember is just this. I mean, because it can become almost tedious in a way, and I hate to say that, but because it's a privilege to be able to go and to see that work and all of that. But you will see in it, for every David or Saint Teresa or conversion of Saint Paul, there are a billion Madonna and Childs. That you're just inundated with, and it just almost deadens you a little bit.
And it also, I mean, in the way that you were talking before about how you were particularly critical or opinionated, I mean, it really does. It makes you not just recognize how much stuff there is, and that can be kind of like, oh my God, does the world need any more of this? But then it also really makes you appreciate the ones that click, the ones that really work.
Right.
And so was this something that did Robin come with you
Yes.
on this trip?
Yeah. We were able to, with the amount of money, I can't remember. I think it was something just like $4,000 or something that they gave us. But with that, we could both go for a month, and we stayed in hostels and backpacked. And I remember right before we were coming home, though, like I was like, because traveling for a month for me is a lot. Like I was ready to get back home, and I was like, oh, we're going home tomorrow. We're gonna get about blah blah blah. And Robin was trying to like, how can we give up everything and get jobs in a youth hostel here or something to try to stay and never go back,
Now, when you were there, like you were saying, you wanted to get back. I mean, part of me thinks like, oh yeah, Paul wanted to be in the studio. But just out of curiosity, how did you work there? What was going on in terms of was it just seeing, or was it also making?
Well, it was seeing and drawing. That was it. That was my most, the only real avenue for creating, journaling, drawing, and then just taking it all in. I remember one of the best things I saw. I can't even remember the name of the opera, but it was in Vienna, and we went to La Scala. And you could get standing room only tickets like 30 minutes before the opera started. And so we just showed up and lined up with people and got these standing room only, and just stood in the back upstairs in one of the balconies, behind one of the balconies, and got to see this amazing opera. That kind of stuff was amazing. I remember Robin wanting to kill me because I didn't do any planning really, except for the Berninis to come over of what we were going to see. So I wanted. We got over there, and I really wanted to see a lot of the Caravaggios, and so I didn't know where they were, and so I think we were in Venice. And I start looking at the guidebooks and looking at stuff. And, oh, this conversion of St. Paul is here, and this is here. And I'm like, oh, we need to go back to Rome because we didn't see all of these Caravaggios. And she was like, hell no. This is your fault. You didn't do any planning. She's like, if you want to go back to Rome, go back to Rome. I'm going on to Milan. And so I didn't want us to split up. So we went together, but she was furious, and we went together. And when we got to Milan, there was a big show that had a lot of those paintings in it. That if I had convinced her to go back to Rome, I would be dead. She would have thrown me in the Arno and with my throat cut, because they wouldn't have been there anyway.
I mean, I think, one of the things I'm reminded of is how how lucky we are sometimes when we travel, and how we just sort of like stumble upon this thing because we didn't know it was going to be there because it was 1990 something,
Right.
and you couldn't just be like, what are the things that I need to see in Milan at this,
Right.
when I'm there. And then also the thing about like, well, where are the Caravaggios? Like I'm sure that somewhere there was like a map of where they all were, but you had to, had to really know, and you really had to look. It wasn't one of those
Or I
things.
could have
like,
asked Betty. Probably she would have told me.
she would have given you the
Right.
lowdown. But I mean, I think,
Right.
I'm struck by that. But then also in the same way that you said, this was the 1990s, and if I was going to go and look up these 100 artists, there was
Right.
going to be some work. I'd have to go to the Reader's Guide for periodical literature, and then I would have to like go through each month, and all that stuff. And I mean, one of the things I'm struck by is, of course, that time. But then also, one of the things I'm also reminded of is traveling with another person and how to navigate that and how to see that. And so you ended up going to Milan, and that's where the show was. And then
Right.
you were talking about going to Vienna. What else did you guys do in this period of time?
We went to Rome. We went to Pompeii. We went to Padua. Saw the Giottos. We went to, let's see, Milan, Siena, Verona. Yeah, so we kind of did the whole much as we could.
And so then, was that an award that you got after graduating, or just before graduating?
I think it was the semester. I think it was right before my last semester. I think we went in the winter. We went in January on the break between the next semester, my last. So.
And then, how did it work there at MCA in terms of your final semester? Like, I know how it works for us. There's a show and blah, blah, blah. What was it like for you in that final semester, especially coming back from this huge trip?
It was all my classes were, like, I think they called them subject, context, and meaning were the painting classes that I was taking. So I was only developing my own, I was only working on my own thing, my own abstract paintings. And having periodic conferences with Fred, or as far as how that was going. Yeah, it was just a lot to assimilate. So I think I was still assimilating all of that stuff, probably for the next couple of years even, when I would think back, oh my God, I saw this in person, But that last semester was spent, like I said, focusing on my own work and preparing for that final show. And, at MCA, the graduating classes weren't that big. So I think almost everybody's final show was in that main area, upstairs and downstairs. And my show was these small black and white paintings, along those lines that I was telling you about, using the grid, an oval form, and blacks and whites. Those were my only elements in the paintings.
Now, who were you? Was there again, I know how it works for us. There's sort of a senior committee. What was it? What was the setup there for you?
We didn't have to. I don't remember us having anything like that where we had to defend what we were doing. We had to do that, especially in these subject context classes. We had to do that almost every critique class. We had to talk about what we were doing and why we were doing it, and you couldn't make a move without having a reason. It took me a long time to get that out of my head after school, saying, you know what, I don't have to know what this means all the time. I don't have to second guess my every move and have a reason for it, But I think it was good to think that way in undergrad. But it took me 5 years, because I painted in black and white for about 7 years after I got out of school. And it took me about 5 years after I got out of school before I did a painting that I was kind of happy with. Everything else, I was just like, this is horrible. I'm never going to be able to do this. But I had a studio, and I would go to it almost every day and work. But it was discouraging. It was really discouraging. And then one day I thought, this starts to look like something. I'm happy with this, so maybe keep going.
What was it you think?
I don't know. I think I just started settling into a process finally that clicked with me, that and started using house paints, and I stopped worrying about mixing colors so much. I let go a lot of this stuff that I thought, oh, you have to do this, like you have to mix colors, you have to, it has to be on a wrapped canvas, it has to be this or it has to be that, it has to be presented in a certain way. I just let go of a lot of that. Fred gave me the idea to just get 5x7 foot pieces of canvas, glue the edges down, put grommets in them, and treat them like sketchbook pages, and do these big black and white paintings on those things on the floor. And when that one was done, turn it over and go to the next one, which helped me as far as infusing the work with some spontaneity that was akin to what I was doing in my sketchbook, because I was do work in my sketchbook and then I would try to make a painting of it, and it just seemed dead. It seemed finished, and it seemed, didn't have the same energy or interest or spontaneity as the drawing, the sketchbook painting, So a lot of my time was spent trying to make that happen in a larger painting. Maybe now I would say, well, screw larger paintings. Then my paintings are just going to be 11 by 14 or whatever. But I mean, I think the experience was good for me. It was good for me to have to come to terms with that and figure out a way to make what I wanted to make.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of what we do in the studio is trying to figure out how to get out of our own way, and then a lot of it is also how to not reproduce that spontaneity, but how to create an environment that can be like working in a sketchbook, but with that kind of freedom, because I think like with the students, so much of what they do in the sketchbook is just gold, because no one's looking, and and all of the reasons sketchbooks are great, and then when it tries to translate into another material, so often it just can't, and that's like I was saying, that some people spend their whole lives trying to get over so-and-so, or spend their whole artistic career trying to figure out X, Y, and Z. I mean, I think for sure that's one of those common questions. Now, when you were talking about making that move, and then after 5 years, finally sort of feeling right about what was going on, and so you were saying right after school, you guys like hopped up and left.
Right.
What'd you guys end up doing? Where'd you go?
We went to New York. We there was another guy, and I'm blanking on his name too, who had graduated before me, like the year before me at MCA, and he and his girlfriend were living in Bushwick in this loft, and it was a horrible neighborhood, and but we just took over his lease. Jeremy Earhart. And he and his girlfriend, I think, were splitting up, and so they wanted to get out of their lease, and Robin and I wanted to move up there, so we just took over their lease, and lived there for a year before coming back to Memphis, because it was like culture shock for me. And I was like, oh, I gotta go back somewhere familiar, and get my bearings. And so we did, and then almost immediately I regretted it. And we spent the next probably 6 years getting back up to New York. And
I feel like maybe that was when I came back, and I think we did a studio visit at some point. I could be wrong.
Because, yeah, we did. Well, I remember when I had the show at Material, I had just moved to Florida, and we were living in St. Augustine, because we drove the paintings back for the show at Material. And then from Florida, we were there for about 2.5 years. And then she got a job offer in New Jersey, in Princeton. And when I saw how close it was to New York City, I was like, oh, let's take this job. And so we ended up moving back up there. And that was around 2008, 7 or 8, I think.
But now you said that you had gone to New York. You were there for a year, and you felt like there was this great culture shock. Like what was it that was particularly shocking? I mean, of course.
Well, the neighborhood was really bad. There was like, I woke up one of the first nights we were there. We were on the second floor in this loft with warehouse windows, and there was like a glow outside. And I go and look, and there's a car on fire, like down on the street. There were burned out husks of cars all over the neighborhood. It was just a warehousing area, and just a few trust fund kids living in lofts around there. And, every sign was in like Hebrew or Spanish. So I couldn't read anything. Our building was right next to some projects. So it was a little dicey. A lot of the people in our building had been mugged and robbed, beaten up. I remember one morning I went across, we used to go across, there was one place, a little diner, and I would go on Sunday mornings to go get something for breakfast to bring back. And one day I did a shortcut through the projects, and I was walking, and there was like a group of like 4 or 5 guys, and they kept looking at me. And I was like, oh, shit, I'm finally going to get mugged. This is, and I'm beaten up and robbed and all this stuff. And so I kept walking. And when I got kind of even with them, they went the other direction, but they kept looking back at me. And I'm like, what are they doing? Why do they keep looking at me? And, so I got to the diner, and when I get ready to leave, it's like, how much? And she goes, oh, it's free. You're a cop, aren't you? And I said no, so I paid. But I realized I had a buzz cut, and I had a parka, like a olive parka, and combat boots, and I was older than most of the kids that lived around there, and I think they thought I was a cop. That's why they were looking at me and dispersed when I got close to there. And then later on, I would notice if I was walking around that area, little kids would make a siren noise, and people would look at me.
That's so funny. I like how you were this like undercover, not
so
cop.
Strange.
Now, what about that? I mean, that year. I mean, you were sort of talking about the culture shock parts, but what about being there in New York for that year?
Great seeing the work, being able to go to the museums all the time. That just was what stayed with me, is that you can get on a subway and you can be in 20, 30 minutes looking at world-class art that you can only see in the magazines, or you can, anywhere else, if you live anywhere else in the world. And we made good friends with some other artists that were living in our building. It was, like I said, it was culture shock, but it was broadening too, And I loved our neighborhood in some ways, because it was predominantly like this Puerto Rican neighborhood, and like on the Puerto Rican Day parade, everybody was out. It just seemed so alive. And Fred used to tell me, well, Paul, you never feel so alive as when you're close to death. So, maybe that was it sometimes too. I don't know. I got hit by a car crossing the street. A lot of things happened, but it was exciting,
Now, what kind of work were you doing there?
I was doing abstract work for the most part. I was kind of going back and forth still. I was doing some abstract work. I was also I remember working on this big 6 foot by something painting of the Garden of Eden, which thank God doesn't exist anymore. And I wasn't ready to show anybody anything. I mean, the people that we became friends with in our building and stuff, we would go back and forth to see each other's work in each other's lofts. But I didn't try to get out in the art scene. Or, I mean, I went to look at stuff, but I didn't try to participate, really. I was really not confident in what I was doing, and really still unsure of it. And like, where is this going? What is it? You know.
And that, because that was sort of during that 5-year period that you were talking about, where you were trying to kind of get your bearings and trying to sort of shake the ghosts.
I was still trying to get rid of that
undergrad
baggage from art school, too.
And so the were the works that you were working on then, were they oil or acrylic?
Mostly acrylic. The Garden of Eden was oil, but the abstract work I was doing was acrylic, house paint, and golden, whatever.
And then, like, thinking about that, when you were talking about those pieces, you were like, thank goodness they don't exist anymore.
Yeah.
How do you? I think that's something that we all sort of struggle with, is like our the old things and how to deal with them. At what point was it that you started to feel like you were rolling, and then that's sort of probably like as far back as you would go?
When I first felt like I was started to do some stuff that I was starting to be happy with, and I started to think, this is kind of looking like something, and it kind of looks like it's kind of like something that's kind of unique to me, and all of that stuff, was when we had we had come back from Memphis, and we'd living in Memphis a while, and then we moved to Florida. And when we moved to Florida, I think it was the environment, just the sun and the way the colors and all that. I just started working in color again, and for the first time, I felt like it worked. I felt like this is working. I was really uncomfortable with color before that, and so that around the time I was showing at that work I showed at Material. Was when I first started thinking, okay, this is something I'm confident in, and I want to start getting it out there. And
that sounds like a good place to pause. Yeah, we can pause there. Great. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
And that was the second of 2 interviews that I did with Paul Behnke. After re-listening to that interview, I realized that we didn't really cover everything. Cool thing, we recorded that more than a year ago. Paul is still here in Memphis. Hopefully, we'll be able to sit down sometime soon and get the rest of it. That's something I'm looking forward to with this project, is being able to meet with these people and talk with these people again and again, hopefully, as we all grow old. So that interview that we just listened to was recorded on December 13th, 2024. And again, thank you so much for listening.